The Lightning Process podcast. Using the tools of the mind-body connection for health and happiness.
Hi, Dr. Phil here. Welcome to the Lightning Process podcast. Today I'm going to talk about mindfulness and how mindfulness relates to the lightning process. Now, recently I've been doing a lot of running. I'm planning to do a marathon this year for the first time ever to celebrate the 25 years of the lightning process. And so I've been listening to a lot of running podcasts to help me do what I need to do. And one of them is about mindfulness. And I was listening to the mindfulness podcast, and it reminded me that there's a lot of similarities between some of the ideas in mindfulness and the lightning process, and also differences. And one of the fascinating things about mindfulness is mindfulness has been around for thousands of years, a central practice to many different philosophical positions and religious persuasions. Particularly Buddhism is one of the places it really shows up. But it's much more recently that it's become famous, kind of household name, particularly where John comes in the 70s and 80s. And it's taken a long time from that early origins to the recent research, 70s, that's how many years ago now, 50 years ago. And now finally it's become a household name that people think is reasonable, whereas probably 20 years ago you'd be considered a bit of a weirdo if you did it. So the lightning process is similar in that it's relatively new. The ideas, which are in some way similar to mindfulness, are quite new to people. And so people are like, oh, how does that all work? So first of all, mindfulness. Lots of different versions of mindfulness. That's the first thing. But the commonest one that you'll hear is something around the idea of meditation, being able to train yourself to stop being distracted, like going, oh, there's a squirrel, and instead be present, be here and now. That's the commonest kind of version of mindfulness that we see, the westernized version of mindfulness. The idea of being present, bringing yourself constantly back to the present. So if you have pain, noticing your pain and being with it. If you find yourself being distracted, bringing your mind back to the center, focusing on your breath, any practice that allows you to stay mindful. And when I was doing my PhD, I was doing a lot of research into mindfulness, how that relates to the lightning process. And the lightning process has some similarities. And first of all, the lightning process says it's really important to be present to what is, to deal with what is. But it's slightly different from mindfulness, or the Western version of mindfulness. The Western version of mindfulness is notice and accept and be okay with what is. The lightning process is slightly different. It says notice what is and then choose how you bring yourself to that. So if you find that you're stressed, it would say then very specifically choose ways to help yourself to become calm. And in my research, it turns out that these ideas are also part of mindfulness. It's not the most common westernized versions, but in the original Buddhist text, there are ideas about really being mindfully having an intention of how you want to deal with what's going on. And that's very much fits with the lightning process. So if you're an athlete and you want to run, then mindfully you want to go, well, how can I get myself into the best shape so I can run in the most effective way? Or if you're a performer and you're about to go on stage, you don't want to be too mindful of how stressed you are. What you want to do is be mindful of how consummate you are as a performer and get yourself into that zone. So about shifting yourself from noticing where you are and choosing how to bring yourself to this moment. And the same with health. And the lightning process works a lot with health. Instead of going, well, this is just how it is, asking ourselves the question, okay, this is what's going on at the moment. This is what's happening in my body at the moment. I wonder what I can do to shift my neurology, my physiology, my mental mindset. Anything that I can do to bring myself to this in the most healing, useful way. Because the research says how we kind of steer our brain, our body, our mind has an effect on what our cells do, what our immune system does. There's some interesting research by Davidson where he looked at prolonged meditators, so people had a lot of experience of meditation, and he found their brains were slightly different, had a more developed part of the insular part of their brain. They had a different immune response than people who didn't meditate on a regular basis. And this has been shown in many, many different studies. The effect of how we use our brain, whether it's meditation, hypnosis, mindfulness, being present, all these things do have an incredible effect. And of course, remembering time for happiness has an effect on our mood, but also has an effect on our physiology. So the lightning process says, instead of just noticing what is, which is a great start, got to be aware of what's going on. If you listen to all my podcasts, you hear me say this, first thing is be aware. But the next stage, instead of just kind of going, okay, accept what is, the lightning process says, look at what you have to accept. So some things we can't change. My leg is broken, it's broken. But what could I do to improve the recovery? So I could rest it, I could put it in a plaster cast, I could visualize it recovering, I could be optimistic, because all these things will also have an impact. So it's really thinking holistically about what can I do to bring myself to this present moment in the most intentionally useful, mindful way. So I hope that helps to unpack some of the similarities and differences between certainly the lightning process and the westernized version of mindfulness. I think if you dig into some of the more ancient Buddhist texts, you see actually the lightning process has a lot of similarity with some of those ideas in mindfulness. And the interesting thing for me is, when I designed the lightning process, I didn't know about any of these ancient Buddhist texts, and I didn't know much about mindfulness at all, actually. But there are some quite interesting parallels between these slightly different perspectives, which I guess is because these are common thoughts that people have about, well, what would make a good life? What do we need to do to help people? So I will see you on the next one. Take care now.
The Lightning Process podcast. Using the tools of the mind-body connection for health and happiness. If you'd like to know more, please visit us at lightningprocess.co.uk.